Hey, what's going on, guys? Realm Gaming here, back into the video. Today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at Frost Death Knight in Season 1 of The War Within. So Frost Death Knight is in a pretty strong place at the moment for Mythic Plus, and Frost DK has pretty good talent builds that don't really sacrifice single target damage for AoE damage, so that's really nice because we do see that in some other specs like Retribution Paladin. And Frost DK has seen some changes from previous expansions in The War Within, such as our Cleaving Strikes. So Cleaving Strikes will now basically refresh itself whenever you leave your Death and Decay for 4 seconds. So this is going to allow a little bit of wiggle room for you to kind of dance back and forth in between your Death and Decay to kind of pick up that Cleaving Strikes effect in case your tank does kind of move the mobs out of your Death and Decay a little. So that's a really nice change. And in the damage department, Frost DK is one of the better specs in the game right now. One of the main downsides is our lack of utility in Mythic Plus. And I want to sit here and say that we do not have good utility. We do. But there are certain things that other DPS specs do better. We don't have any sort of Dispel, for example. We don't have an AoE stun. We don't have a Bloodlust. So we're very mid, I guess you would say, in terms of Mythic Plus utility. Now, one thing that we do bring, though, is our Death Grip. So basically, we can reposition any single mob with our Death Grip, kind of pull them into the group. And this is really going to help out with newer tanks, because there's always that one or two straggling casters in the back that you can kind of grip in and cleave them down with the rest of the mobs. So let's just quickly recap some of the pros and cons here. So going back to strengths, so we have a really good single target AoE damage. We have very strong survivability with things like our Death Strike. And we have some of the best mob control in the game. We have our Mind Freeze, we have our Blinding Sleet, we have our Asphyxiate, and we also have our Death Grip. Now, some of the weaknesses, we do lack some core utility, but this is a very minor weakness, and I don't want this to stop you from playing the spec. It's really not that big of a deal, to be honest. So I would just kind of put this in the minor weakness category. And in terms of weaknesses, that's really it. I think Frost DK is one of the better melee specs at the moment, and it is in a very good spot at the moment for previous expansions. Let's go ahead and quickly talk about some of our Mythic Plus utility. So kind of like we were saying earlier, we do have a ton of stops. We have our Mind Freeze and our Blinding Sleet. So Mind Freeze is a ranged interrupt, and it's on a very low cooldown, about 15 seconds. Blinding Sleet is going to be our AoE stop. It's like a disorient effect, and this is on a 1-minute cooldown. You can also pick up other options. You can pick up Asphyxiate if you want. Then we have our Death Grip as well. That's on a 25-second recharge and will also work as an interrupt or just a way to reposition mobs. So you want to be using this pretty much on cooldown. We also have one of the strongest single target slows in the game, Chains of Ice. Then we have really good defensives as well. We have our Anti-Magic Shell, and you can actually use Anti-Magic Shell to cheese a lot of mechanics in the game. We also have access to our Anti-Magic Zone. This is really going to help out your healer, especially if you time it with a very hard hitting boss ability. And then finally, we have our personal here, Iceborne Fortitude. So this is going to give you a stun immunity, and this is going to substantially reduce the amount of damage you take every 2 minutes. Okay, let's talk a little bit just how to play Frost Death Knight, just some general tips. So Frost DK is going to have a proc and sort of resource management system. And then most of our builds are going to be revolving around Killing Machine and Empowered Obliterates. So the way Frost DK works in pretty much any Death Knight is you spend runes and you get back runic power. And the way you can get a lot of runes back is through runic empowerment here. So each runic power that we do spend has a 2% chance to instantly grant us a rune. So you're trying to keep this sort of balance, sort of yin-yang effect between your runes and your runic power. And then finally, you're going to make sure you're keeping maximum uptime on your major cooldowns. So depending on the talents that you take, you could be taking something like Frost Scythe, your Pillar of Frost, of course, and your Remorseless Winter. These are all going to be cooldowns that you're going to be keeping good uptime on. Now that brings us to two different things. So let's go ahead and get into the opener now. We're going to cover 2 builds, and you can run whichever one that you want. Top end builds are actually running Breath of Sindragosa at the moment. However, Breath of Sindragosa is not the most friendly build. So if you are just kind of doing pickup groups, you're just kind of in the 10 to 11-ish range, I would probably run something like the Obliteration build. You're not relying on your tank to pull those big packs so that you can dump all that runic power into a big Breath of Sindragosa. And it's just a little bit easier to play around. But of course, if you are running in a coordinated group, you are going to pull higher numbers in something like Breath of Sindragosa. So let's quickly just go over the Breath of Sindragosa build. Starting with the opener, you're going to go directly into an Abomination Limb, into Remorseless Winter. Now, since this is your opener, you're going to have a lot of runes available to you, so you're going to simply obliterate until you run out of those runes. And you want to save one rune to drop a Death and Decay. Then from here, you'll simply dump all that runic power that you generated through a Breath of Sindragosa, and you want to pair that Breath of Sindragosa with both a Pillar of Frost and a Reaper's Mark. Now, Reaper's Mark is going to be something that is unique to the Breath build. You'll not be running Reaper's Mark in the Obliteration build. So in the Breath of Sindragosa build, we are running the Deathbringer hero talents, and then in the Obliterate build, we are running the Rider of the Apocalypse hero talents. Now, if you are running Obliteration, let's go ahead and look at that opener. So this opener is a little bit more simple. It's quite simply just Abomination Limb into your Remorseless Winter, and then you pop your big cooldowns such as Pillar of Frost, Frostworm's Fury, and your Empower Rune weapon. And then from here, you just proceed into your normal priority. Okay, now let's go ahead and talk about the single target priority. So single target priority is a little weird because we have a priority while Breath is active, and we have a priority while Breath is not active. All right, so for single target here, we have, of course, we're going to go into the Breath while Breath is active priority, and then the standard rotation while Breath is not active. So starting out with Breath of Sindragosa here, very straightforward. Pillar of Frost into Empower Rune Weapon into Remorseless Winter into Reaper's Mark. You can see in step 2 here, we have sort of a discussion between using Empower Rune Weapon between 70 runic power and 40 runic power. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into the AoE section. But while Breath is active, you want to be sending your cooldowns and funnel as much damage into that Breath as you possibly can. Now from here, we will want to obliterate if we do have those 2 Killing Machine procs. Just a reminder, Killing Machine is going to ensure that our next Obliterate does critically strike. Then going into step 6, if we do not have those Killing Machine procs, then we can go into our Soul Reaper. We want to ensure that target is under 35% HP so that we can get the Explode effect from Soul Reaper. From here, we can Howling Blast if our Rhyme is active. And then from here, we kind of want to manage our runic power. We don't want to be wasting, in step 8, we don't want to be wasting our runic power on Obliterate spams. So we want to try to save those Obliterates for those Killing Machine procs if possible. And then the final steps here is Horn of Winter and Death and Decay, and we're just sort of prioritizing spending those runes to prolong our Breath as long as possible. Then finally, step 11 here, Abomination Limb. So after our Breath is up, our priority does change a little bit. So we'll take a look real quick at the standard rotation and single target. So the standard rotation is going to be Frost Striking. We're gonna try to keep as much uptime on our Icy Talons and Unleash Frenzy. So those are procced from a runic power spending ability such as Frost Strike. So you want to make sure you get as much uptime on those as you possibly can. And then from here, we're kind of funneling our cooldowns into that haste buff that we're getting from Death and Decay. So we're pairing our Remorseless Winter into our Pillar of Frost, and then we're getting Death and Decay out, and we're funneling that damage into a big Reaper's Mark. Then going into step 6 here, we want to obliterate if we have 2 stacks of our Killing Machine. So this is going to allow us to build up a big pool of runic power, and then we can dump that with our Frost Strike. And then quite simply, the rest of the priority here is just generating and spending through Obliterate and Frost Strike, and of course weaving in that Soul Reaper at 35% HP in step 10 here. Then step 14, you want a Horn of Winter, but you do not want to use it right before your Breath of Sindragosa comes up because you want to have that available for your Breath. Then final priority here, your Abomination Limb. Okay, now let's go ahead and take a look at the Obliteration priority. So much more simple, much more straightforward. This is one of the main reasons I like to run Obliteration. It is quite simply ensuring that you're keeping your Icy Talons and Unleash Frenzy up, sending your cooldowns such as Empower Rune Weapon, then sending Obliterates, Soul Reapers, Howling Blast, and Frost Strikes. Okay, now let's go ahead and talk about Frost Death Knight AoE. So essentially, while your Breath is active, you want to be sending your cooldowns. So that's going to include, like step 1 here, Pillar of Frost, your Empower Rune Weapon, your Remorseless Winter, and your Reaper's Mark. Let's go ahead and go back up to step 2. So we can see here with less than 70 runic power and less than 3 runes, or if you're under 40 runic power. So in most cases, you want to use your Empower Rune Weapon when you have less than 70 runic power and less than 3 runes. This is going to be the vast majority of cases. Now, there are some scenarios where if you are below 40 runic power and you're in a heavy movement phase, you can actually utilize the haste buff to speed up your GCD to dump runes into runic power. So you can use it in 2 different ways, but for the most part, you're just going to be using it at 3 runes and less than 70 runic power. Now, going into step 5, you always want to be in your Death and Decay. This is going to be due to the Unholy Ground talent that's going to give us that 5% haste buff. And then, of course, due to our Cleaving Strikes, that's going to make our Obliterate hit multiple targets. Now, next we have our Howling Blast, and we want to be using Howling Blast whenever our Rhyme is active. So this is essentially going to cause our next Howling Blast to consume no runes and do 225% additional damage. And then if we do get a Killing Machine proc, then we will want to Obliterate. So Killing Machine is going to ensure that our next Obliterate will critically strike. Then from here, we can use our Horn of Winter to regenerate some more runes and runic power. And then finally, Abomination Limb. Now that is simply just while Breath is active. Now outside of that, when Breath is not active, we go into a completely different rotation. So we have sort of 2 buffs that we're trying to maintain while Breath is not active, and that's going to be our Icy Talons and our Unleashed Frenzy. And the way that we can proc those is through runic power spending abilities like Frost Strike. So you want to make sure that you are maintaining those buffs at all times and ensure that you are Frost Striking to proc them. Your next priority is going to be your cooldowns again, so Abomination Limb, Remorseless Winter paired with Pillar of Frost, and then Reaper's Mark. And then in this case, we want to be pairing our Death and Decay with our Pillar of Frost, because if you remember, we get the haste buff from our Death and Decay, and we want that haste to be funneled into our Pillar of Frost. From here, we want to Obliterate, but only if we have both a Killing Machine proc and a Cleaving Strikes buff active. If not, then we want to Howling Blast instead on a Rhyme proc. Then if we only have a Killing Machine proc, then we can Obliterate, and if we have none of that, then we can Frost Strike into an Obliterate. And then finally here, a Horn of Winter to help regenerate some of our resources. Now going into the Obliteration build, and this is going to be taking Rider of the Apocalypse. So very similar, you're going to want to ensure that you're Frost Striking to keep Icy Talons and Unleashed Frenzy active. So we want to make sure that we're keeping those 2 buffs from a runic power spending ability active at all times. Then from here, we want to send our cooldowns with our Death and Decay window. And you notice we do not have Reaper's Mark in this scenario since we are taking Rider of the Apocalypse. So you want to send your Empower Rune weapon, your Remorseless Winter, your Death and Decay paired with your Pillar of Frost. And then you just kind of go in between Obliterate, Howling Blast spams, and Frost Strike spams. So you'll be generating with Obliterate and Howling Blast spams, and then you will be dumping with Frost Strike and Remorseless Winter. Alright guys, that's going to be it for this one. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. We'll see you on the next one.